Like to share this week, Guru Maharaj, or would you like to go straight into the questions?
I'd like to share my answers to your questions.
So the first question today is Uddhava. To share this week, Guru Maharaj, would you like to go straight into the
Sri Krishna, Guru Maharaj. Can you hear me?
Yes, good morning, good afternoon,
Yeah.
good evening.
These days, a friend of mine from the Mayapur times came to visit me. An old friend, and some, since he was with me, he saw your book and he read, one of your books, and then he had some questions.
Okay.
So his first question, the one that he said, like he's comfortable asking publicly, is if there is this idea that different souls come from, some come from Maha-Vishnu, some souls come from Balaram, some come from Narayan, and if he will go to a soul from the material world, will go to Vaikuntha. He says if there is this analogy of the passport says, and the visa, he says, how would that work? You need to get a nationality there. You would need to change your nationality because you are no longer from the material world anymore, and you are only from there, or you are a dual citizen, or how it works. That was his first question.
Well, I think we should be clear that what we are at present in terms of our identification is illusory and not real. So we are living in a false identity related to the body-mind complex. And excuse me, seeing understanding the difference between ourself as an Atma, unit of consciousness, and matter. This speaks to the one aspect of the Atma. We call it Swarup Gyan, the Swarup Gyan of the jiva. The Swarup Gyan of the jiva is the awareness of itself, that I am, which distinguishes the jiva from matter, which is inert. In a school like Shankar, they'll leave it at that. Of course, Brahman is, that's all, and the jiva is thought to be one with Brahman. But aside from that, we acknowledge that the jiva is not inert, and it is by its nature. Its swarup is gyan, is not inert, it's conscious, but it's conscious of itself. So this is one aspect of the jiva. And if we understand or come to realize the difference between ourselves and inert matter, I have in the past referred to that as a passport to get out of jail, so to speak. Because now you're no longer identified with inert matter, which is the body-mind complex, which is not you, right? Now there's another aspect to the jiva also, and that's its gyan shakti, or its dharma bhuta gyan, which means its attribute of knowledge. Excuse me, its attribute of knowledge. It's inherently has knowledge, wisdom. And so aside from being conscious of itself, it can be aware of and know and does inherently other things, including Bhagwan, Paragyan, and itself as servant of Bhagavan. So this second feature, if you will, of the jiva, when we speak about the jiva as gyan, when that attribute of knowledge. Let me give an example. Example that's given by Jiva Goswami. There's a light, and it like here is a lamp. It illumines itself. And it also illuminates the wall and my hand and myself to some extent. So that extension of the illumination that sheds light, this is the self attribute of knowledge. And when it's in touch with objects of knowledge, then that knowledge manifests. Now that knowledge of the jiva that's inherent can contract or it can expand. So for example, my eyes have the capacity to see, but that capacity contracts under the influence of darkness, and it expands under the influence of light. In this analogy, the darkness is the influence of the Maya Shakti, and the light is the influence of bhakti. Right? So when the self's knowledge expands, then it comes to know itself, not only the fact that it exists, but itself in terms of its swabhav, its inherent nature, that makes it an individual. And that inherent nature may be as a das of Narayan, or a gopa, or a gopi in Braj, right? Which will cause us in the practice of bhakti to resonate with that type of bhakti as our bhakti becomes deep and steady, consistent, well-reasoned, and so forth. That's when really impressions really start to inform these vasanas or samskars, impressions. Impressions are not just something outside, but they are an internal response to external or environmental influences. So we have environmental influence, for example, of bhakti through sadhu sangha and so forth. Why does a particular type of bhakti resonate with us? As our practice becomes deep, well, we start to develop impressions, tendencies, and that corresponds with our nature. Why would otherwise? If we didn't have a nature, then it would just be blank slates that something's printed upon, which is would make us something like just Swarup Gyan without the Dharma Bhuta Gyan. So the knowledge of ourself as a servant of Krishna, knowledge itself, properly understood, is bhakti. By knowledge, one becomes liberated. But it means, in this context, it means bhakti, right? The end of knowledge. What is the king of knowledge? What does Krishna say? Raja Vidya, Raja Guhyam. The king of knowledge, the king of secrets, is Man Manabhava Mad Bhakto, Madhyaji Man Namaskuru. I'm citing the beginning and the end of the 9th chapter of the Gita. It says the king of knowledge is to be my devotee. That's what it means. This is the end of knowledge. There's a meaning for the word, the Sanskrit word gopi also. It's cited in commentaries on Gopal Tapani. I can't recall it, because Brigapad, if he's online, may recall. But anyway, it's been explained to be knowledge. So anyway, so this passport then, right? This expanding of the attribute of the self's knowledge, which includes knowledge of itself as a servant of Krishna, is something that is inherent in the jiva. But the inherent is something like, and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself gives this example. He probably draws it from Vedanta Deshika, from the Ramuja Sampradaya. A person a child has a inheritance, but doesn't know about it. It's his. The documents are signed. It belongs to him, but he's not of age to take advantage of it and needs to be told about it. Or a person has a treasure, hidden treasure in their house and doesn't know about it. So a wise man comes and says, there's a treasure in your house. You have to look. Don't look to the north, the south, the west, but to the east. East represents devotion, religion, bhakti. And there you'll find the treasure, so forth. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu gives this example to Sanatana Goswami in Chaitanya Charitamrita. So that's where we put together these apparently contradictory terms, inherent and bestowed, right? An inheritance is something that it's inherent, it's yours, but it still needs to be bestowed at the same time. You need to be told about it. We're told from the scripture, you're not the body, you're a servant of Krishna. So this is some theoretical knowledge that we're collecting. The value and the use, the purpose of the theoretical knowledge is to give rise to the realization, the internal knowledge that the jiva possesses, to wake it up, to expand it from its contracted position. And so anyway, this expanded feature or knowledge of the selves, as I say, includes its knowledge of its eternal relationship with Krishna. So that's the passport, if you will, right? So it'll be given to you. It'll be, but it's there at the same time. I don't know if I'm answering his question entirely, but did I?
Yeah, we'll tell him to listen, and if he has any further inquiry, he will let you know. But overall, he's a educated man, and he appreciated sacred preface. He read it when he was young.
all the jivas, of course, are in the material world are emanating out of Maha-Vishnu. That's a fact. But Maha-Vishnu is the avatar of Mahasankarshan, who's the expansion of Mool Sankarshan, who is the expansion of Balaram in Braj. And Balaram is said to be Bhakta Abhiman, Mool Balarame, that the root of the ego of a bhakta in everyone is Balaram. Yeah. So if you're wondering how about a jiva coming from Maha-Vishnu, if you will, could have a swabhav for Braj Bhakti, well, there's your answer. Okay, sorry, go on with the further question.
Yeah, thank you. No, for the moment, I will just let him watch his video.
Yeah.
The other question is more private because he's. But overall, as I say, he's an educated man, and he really appreciates the sacred preface. So,
I wish he was here. We could discuss it further, but
yes, he just left today.
Okay.
I'd like to know if you're hearing me. I would like to make a question.
Who's asking? Marco? Sachi? No? Who? Yes, but who?
Are you there, Marco? You had a follow-up.
Oh yes, I was wearing my headphones, so I think I had to disconnect them in order to interact better. Are you hearing me?
Yep.
Okay. Well, I was initiated in Bhakti Yoga in February '87. I'm from Chile. And about 20 years after that, I started kind of detaching or when walking out from the movement. And I have felt a very strong attraction to Ramana Maharshi's or Advaita Vedanta teachings. And I'd like to know, because I like the devotees also, I don't like the orthodox part, let's say, these heavy and fanatic rules, but I like bhajan, kirtan, Sri Krishna's form, especially Mahaprabhu Sri Chaitanya in his endless mercy, I would say. And it's kind of confusing to me at this moment because I remember when I was living in the temple, I heard kind of, it's better to embrace a tiger than embrace an impersonalism and stuff like that. So I'd like to know from Maharaj what his opinion to a person. I'm 50 years old now. I was 17 when I met the devotees and I went to live in the temple. So kind of a struggling moment in my life, how to deal with these two realities or two philosophies I like.
Well, they're very different philosophies. And it seems to me that from what you said, that there are aspects of Gaudiya Vaishnavism as you experienced it in a particular institution that you had trouble relating with and distanced yourself from. That's perhaps understandable. Different institutions may play it out in different ways, and they may sometimes emphasize details as if they're principles by misconstruing them. That's problematic. At the same time, of course, you spoke about heavy rules, and I think it's important. I don't know what in particular you're referring to when you say that, but I think it's important to note that any school of Vedanta is a heavy school, if you will, heavy and radical school, a radical departure from our present purview of what life is about. And it requires a very radical change from us in order to realize the truths of Vedanta and uncover the self that has been covered from a time without beginning. Certain practices may be difficult, let's take for example, if I may, let's take yoga for example. Yoga as articulated by Patanjali in the Yoga Sutras. One of the angas or the limbs of the body of that practice is celibacy. So there's a heavy rule, but according to Patanjali in the classical school of yoga, this, in order to practice such that you will attain perfection, this is required. The same is true in the school of Gyan. Bhakti, by contrast, celibacy is not an anga of bhakti. Therefore, this speaks to the power of bhakti to be that it can be efficacious, even in the context of a married life with children, which is typically the life of the world rather than the life of the mystic leaving the world. It's, you have to have an income, you have to take care of children, you have to be concerned about the household. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu told his householders who wanted to give all his money, don't give all your money. Keep some for yourself. You need some for your family, and so forth. So, but that doesn't mean that bhakti isn't heavy. Also, it's a Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's school, Gaudiya Vedanta, is as heavy as any other school. But it tends to be more user-friendly because it works with the trajectory, our karmic trajectory, rather than trying to stop it. The Buddha tried to just stop it and sit down, for example. Easier said than done. Bhakti works with the trajectory. Our trajectory is that our senses are in touch with sense objects. So rather than withdrawing our senses from sense objects, to remain in touch with them and engage them in the context of Krishna service. So that's what it's why, or one of the ways in which it's said to be user friendly comparatively to the schools of yoga or Gyan, which are for renunciates. In yoga and Gyan, one of the angas, limbs of the body of the school of Gyan, of Shankar, is vairagya. And therefore, you find the aesthetics in the school. I mean, just walk off into the Himalayas. That's it, barefoot, naked. Bhakti is a lot more generous than that. Uddhava in the Bhagavatam says, our renunciation is we wear the hand-me-downs of Krishna, and he's a prince. Check out my outfit, But what the implication of that, of course, is that we're servants. It's harder for the heart that is possessed of an enjoying and a taking, karmically speaking, taking perspective, to now serve than it is to stop taking. Stop taking is halfway. That's Gyan. I won't take from the world because why? I have the knowledge that will implicate me further. But the heart to become from being an enjoyer and a taker to becoming a giver, that's radical. But it's easy in another sense. We're the hand-me-downs of Krishna. It sounds good, but the implication is I'm only eating what's offered to Krishna. I'm only wearing what as Uddhava was saying, what Krishna wore. And so, of course, he was, living in the association of Krishna at the time. So these are some thoughts. So I don't know. And I just address the first part of your question that certain things, certain law rules and what were heavy, you didn't identify with. So I don't know exactly what you're referring to, but this is a heavy school, as is any school, and it calls for radical change in us. That's one point. Aside from that, philosophically speaking, the two, Gaudiya Vedanta and Advaita Vedanta, are different schools of Vedanta, and each of these schools articulates their position based on the scripture. So they draw from the Upanishads and Bhagavad and so from the Gita to establish these from this body of revelation their worldview. If I were, and I have, to look at, for example, Ramanuja's Vedanta discourse and that of Shankar, two philosophers, two theologians, if you will, I mean, it's very clear to me that Ramanuja has a better understanding and interpretation of the sacred texts than Shankar, who imports this saguna, nirguna, two tiers of Brahman. He imports this idea into the text. That's why Krishnadas says Vyasbrata in Krishna Kaviraj in Chaitanya Charitamrita. Shankar, referring to Shankar, he says Shankar is saying in his commentary that Vyas didn't know what he was talking about, Vyasbrata. Therefore, I'm going to tell you what it really means. So we have a strong disagreement of scripturally speaking, and the two interpretations. Now, if you step back a minute from the details of the scriptural interpretation, let's hold on to it for a second. There are many contemporary persons who, or a number of them, who are interested in non-duality and identify with what they feel is Shankar's perspective, or Ramanuja, or Ramana Maharshi, and so forth. But I'm not sure how well they understand it. Unlike you, they like to forego the baggage, if you will, of Krishna Lila, deities, and all these things which they can't make sense out of. But Shankar didn't do that. He thought that Krishna, he You can't just, if you want to follow Advaita Vedanta, I'm not speaking to you per se, but in general, to the contemporary community of persons identifying with non-duality. It's it's a popular word, contemporary spirituality. That I don't know how well it's understood, because the non-duality, the king of the non-dual school, the founder is very much Shankar, and he does posit a Nirguna Brahman and a Saguna Brahman. They want to ignore the whole Saguna Brahman largely. They call it imagination and so forth, because it's religious baggage, and we want to get away from all of that. But Shankar was very adamant that there is a Saguna Brahman, and indeed, Krishna, among different forms of Saguna Brahman, is the most charming, most beautiful, and so forth. So that's another point to consider. But then, largely speaking, I would say you might look at it like this. Advaita Vedanta, in the practicing stage, idealizes something like this. They would like to they love to exist. Love to exist. And in the Bhakti school, we exist to love. There's a very difference in the progen, in the goal, in the outcome, in the attainment. One thing is to exist to love, another thing is to love to exist. I think the latter is more noble, and it resonates more with our humanity. Let me give you an example. Do you live to go to sleep, which ends all suffering in deep sleep? The mind shuts down. There's no dream. The body has shut down. The senses are not active in relation to sense objects, and it's peaceful. It's contentless consciousness. So do you live, do we work, rise, and to go to sleep? Or do we live to love? Now, Shankar would reason the pursuit of love, that's an illusion. Go to sleep. It's similar to Buddhism and suffering. I don't live to sleep. I live to love. And here is a school of Vedanta that gives us reason to believe that if there's false love, there must be real love. It's attainable. Now, you have to add to that, of course, the fact that while I say that Advaita Vedanta posits loving to exist, the ultimate attainment has no loving in it whatsoever, because there's no experience. In the goal of Advaita Vedanta, there is no experience, because there's no other. There is no bliss. There is no knowledge. Advaita and Shankar would say Brahman is bliss and is knowledge. But if you want to, let's look to, for example, what's his name? Ramakrishna. Ramakrishna, famous mystic, right? Well, before Vivekananda made him into an Advaitin in his world campaign, which he wasn't, Ramakrishna was a bhakta of Goddess Kali. He reasoned that it's better to taste sugar than to be sugar. Well, that makes sense to me too. So here the point is that the tasting requires another. It requires the consciousness, the subjective consciousness, and the object to repose the consciousness in, to know, to taste, to experience, and so forth. So I'm not personally very attracted to the idea of being bliss, whatever that could even means, or being knowledge, but to taste knowledge, to taste bliss, and to have knowledge, and to be a doer, also be an agent. All of these things are, incorporated within all forms of Vaishnava Vedanta, which are the majority of the schools of Vedanta. If you want to look at the schools of Vedanta, well, it's 4 against 1, 4.5, if you will, against 1 in terms of interpretation. And I believe personally that the If you like non-duality, do you want it naked or do you want it dressed? So that's the way I would look at it. Shankar's got an undressed non-duality, and we've got a self-dressed and decorated non-duality, because we also posit Advaita Tattva. There's nothing but Krishna, in other words. The famous statement, Sarvam Kalo Idam Brahma, everything is Brahman. Sri Rama commented, everything is Brahman. So there's Brahman and there's things, and the things are also Brahman. And us being, one of the things, his parts and parcels. We are also Brahman, and we're also not Brahman. So I think that Ramana Maharshi is, of course, a very interesting person. The nature of his experience, or his realization, let's say, is also described in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, and it's certainly different than what the goal of Gaudiya Vaishnavism is, even when there is some common ground. So yes, there's common ground between these two in many respects, and there may be aspects of one or the other that one likes more than the other, but I believe it requires considerable focus and deep understanding of the philosophical implications of the path and what it takes to walk on the path to determine which one is more desirable, more correct, first I could say, more desirable. Let's say one thing about Gaudiya Vaishnavism is that unlike the other schools of Vaishnava Vedanta, it gives more credibility, in one sense, to Shankar's ideal, because it does accept that you could enter into Sayuja Mukti. The fact that you're an individual jiva won't change, but the sense that you're an individual will be lost, and you'll emerge there. We find that to be, less desirable for any number of reasons. Is it more desirable? Which is more desirable, peace or love? And is peace not really part of love? And is the movement in love that is sometimes crooked, like love? What do they call that? Lover's quarrel. Not looked at from objectively, something to be also desirable. It brings the two, it separates them momentarily, brings them back together. So love is very dynamic. Let me give you another example. If I go into the forest and there's a beautiful pond and it's just still, very still, peaceful, well, that will very much pacify my mind, right? If I throw a whole bunch of stones in the pond, all these ripples will go in different directions, and my mind will become disturbed by that, comparatively. But if I take one stone and throw it in, and I throw 1,000 stones in the exact same spot, then that placid, calm pond will have beautiful ripples. They will be like non-duality, beautified, decorated, ornamented. Now it's moving, but its moving is not like the movement in quicksand, which takes you down. It's not like the movement in material life, where I'm moving after something that will be here today, but it will be gone tomorrow. It's not like that. Lila is a movement that is a movement out of fullness, not out of emptiness. Material life is a movement out of emptiness, a sense of emptiness, a lack. Lila is a movement out of fullness. It's an overflowing. Compassion is included within it, and it's the baseline only of the experience of love and fullness. So, for these reasons, I would encourage you to look deeply into Vedanta, what the discourse really says about the two paths, what the two goals really are. You put Chaitanya Mahaprabhu dancing in ecstasy in Krishna Nam next to Ramana Maharshi, and you can have your answer, which is more desirable. One time, Pujapad Sridhar Maharaj was visited by a bhakta of Kali, who wanted to hear from Sridhar Maharaj, and presented himself. Why Krishna rather than Kali? And he just presented a picture. Here's Kali. Here's Krishna. You take your choice. It was obvious. So even the way in which these deities are depicted. Let's take Shiva Shankar. Shiva is depicted as meditating. He's covered in ashes. He has something to attain. Krishna's depicted playing the flute. He has nothing to attain. He's charming everyone. Everyone's attracted. He's drawing every passion. Everyone is drawing to. So, I mean, it's a big argument from our side, but appreciate the question. Some thoughts, consider them. What else?
There's a follow-up, Guru Maharaj, from Guru Nishta.
Good
morning, Guru Maharaj.
Morning.
You were saying that you'd rather taste bliss than be bliss, and I obviously agree with that. It's a wonderful idea, but I was wondering, could it also be said that as Gaudiyas, we can actually have both? Because, you know, when we have our seat of Svarup, that Svarup is made out of bliss. So we are bliss, but we taste it at the same time.
Yeah, years ago, I saw a book by Thich Nhat Hanh. He's a famous Buddhist, Vietnamese Buddhist monk. And he wrote a book called Being Peace. And I thought, we should write a book called Being Love, because it's true. It's a nice point that you raise. So we can make sense out of being bliss in the context of having a spiritual body that is the bliss of the self and bliss of Bhagavan together, and tasting it at the same time. So being bliss and tasting bliss at once, rather than just being bliss and not tasting it. Okay. Is that all right, Ernest? I'm agreeing with you.
Yes, wonderful. Thank you.
What else?
Next question is from Shraddha.
Shraddha in Canada. She says, Pranams Gurudev, namaskar. I have a question about the yudha-vira in Vrindavan of Braj. This is mentioned in Circle of Friends. Apart from Radha, I see that the other gopis did not take part in the activity of yudha-vira, but is it possible that they could have cheered her on or arranged with associates or a parrot messenger to set the scene near the banyan tree or increase Radha's courage to be able to prepare her for fighting with Krishna as Bakari? I ask this because I am attracted to this secondary rasa, and I feel I am drawn to be a well-wisher for this activity, but have some inner work and advancement to establish this. I would be grateful for your thoughts. Thank you.
Well, yudha-vira is a Vira rasa is one of the secondary rasas in Rupa Goswami's system, and yudha-vira is one of the types of that. It's a play fighting. So you're referring to the last chapter, I believe, of Circle of Friends, where I have explained Jiva Goswami's statement in Priti Sandarbha that the Kanthabhav, the love, for example, Radha's Kanthabhav for Krishna, is mixed with Sakya. And so you're referring to a Leela example that I cited, where Radharani wrestles with Krishna which is typical of those in Sakyarasa. Yudha-vira is very common within Sakyarasa because Krishna's friends wrestle with him and often they win. The classic example of Sri Ram defeating Krishna and Krishna has to carry him on his shoulders. So, yes, of course, the other gopis were cheering her on. Of course. They wanted her to win. They didn't want Krishna to win. This Lila, Radharani dresses up like a wrestler and wrestles with Krishna. So, so it's an aspect. It's a prominent aspect of Sakyarasa. Would be a less prominent aspect of Madhurya Rasa, but we did cite an example of it there. All good. What else?
The next question is from Kanashyam in Brazil.
And he says, Guru Maharaj, can you talk a little about Jahnava Thakurani's contribution to our sampradaya, and what is the connection between her and Ananga Manjari?
Well, excuse me, I've also written about that at length in Circle of Friends. I dedicated a chapter to that. But Jahnava is the consort, the principal consort of two sisters who were married to Nityananda Prabhu. And at the time of his passing, she became the prominent in the line of succession from Nityananda Prabhu. Of course, Nityananda Prabhu had many successors, if you will, or associates that under his influence spread Gaudiya Vaishnavism widely. The Dwadasa Gopal, these 12 cowherd boyfriends of Krishna that appeared in the Leela, the chief of which was Udaranatha Thakur, the patron saint of Prabhupada's youth and his family. They deferred, in many respects, to Jahnava after the passing of Nityananda Prabhu. She went to Vrindavan, and at darshan of the Goswamis, gave darshan of herself, we should say, to the Goswamis, and so forth. And their insights as to the dispensation of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu with a focus on Madhurya Rasa became something that she championed in perhaps a way that it hadn't been to the same extent previously within Nityananda's lineage, although he obviously pointed everyone to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and so forth. Still, most of his associates were themselves in Sakyarasa. So she played an important role in terms of the unfolding of the Goswami's insights as to all that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is about, and Kavi Karnapur, who wrote a book describing making wise and insightful spiritual conjectures as to who the associates of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu were in Krishna Lila. He gives different opinions in this regard, with regard to Jahnava, one of which is that she is a manifestation or reincarnation, as you like, of Radharani's younger sister, whose name in the Leela is Ananga Manjari. So that was picked up on by a number of devotees, and it became a prominent understanding. It is a later understanding, because Kavi Karnapur's book is a little later than the Goswami's works, Explorarana Dashtipika. they don't make that identification. The Goswamis anywhere have written about that, but it's reasonable. So, and Bhaktivinoda Thakur, of course, came in that line. So his Diksha line comes through Nityananda and Jahnava, and then this Madhurya Rasa influence was prominent in the Bhagnapar line of followers of Nityananda and Jahnava. And so he also acknowledges that or identifies Jahnava with an Ananga Manjari. And she plays a prominent role in his own internal life as Kamal Manjari, as he's explained briefly in his work, Navadvip Bhavataranga. So you might want to look at that book, Navadvip Bhavataranga, of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. So did I answer all of the entirety of the question? I think I did.
So,
a contribution to sampradaya and the
connection, yeah.
Yeah.
I think Guru Maharaj.
Okay.
So the next question is from Madhav Mehta.
And Madhav says, Dandavat Pranam, Swami Maharaj. I'm wondering about Krishna's leelas of killing the demons. Before Krishna left for Mathura, most of these leelas took place in Braj. I was wondering, how could these demons enter the Holy Land? Was it an influence of material nature on the Dham that has appeared on Bhumi? Or did Krishna want them to enter so he could deliver them and have enchanting leelas for the benefit of the devotees? Thank you, and Dandavat Pranams.
Well, the Prakat Leela, or the manifest Leela, the Bhoma Leela, is thought to be a mixture of spirituality and lack thereof. It's been compared to the sadhaka deha, the practitioner's body, which is a work in progress, in that our senses are in touch with sense objects. They should be in touch with sense objects for the pleasure of Krishna, but sometimes they are and sometimes they're not, right? And so the sadhana is about making all of our contact with sense objects to be in pursuit of the pleasure of Krishna's senses. Rishikena Rishikesha Sevanam Bhakti Ruchate. This is a definition of bhakti. When the senses, our senses are in the service of the master of the senses, that's bhakti. And this is very understandable. When our senses are in touch with sense objects for the pleasure of the senses themselves, a material identity arises out of that. I have my likes, I have my dislikes, my hots, my colds, my goods, my bads, and that's me. That's how I'm defined by that. So an identity arises out of our contact with sense objects, and the mind's determination about that contact, which is, I like it, I don't like it. Sankalpa, vikalpa. So now if you take the same senses and engage them with sense objects for the pleasure of Krishna's senses, arguably another identity will arise out of that, right? That's your svabhav. That's who you are. So, sadhana, the sadhaka deha, this practitioner's body that we get, for example, at the time of initiation, is a work in progress. And when we attain bhava, then it's fully spiritualized. So the Prakat Leela, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur compares it to a sadhaka deha, where there are material and spiritual aspects. And some people, some demons people are so demonic. Krishna says in the Gita that I put them by their activities, it's warranted, into demonic species, life after life after life. So Sanatana Goswami, or Rupa Goswami in Laghu Bhagavatamrita. He says that if they become big enough demons, then they get to take birth in Krishna Lila. and Krishna liberates them. So this is one way to go. Just become a huge demon. Life after life after life after life. And eventually you'll be born in the Prakat Lila and Krishna will slay you. And you can get Sayuja Mukti, or maybe Sarupi Mukti. But that's not a good idea. But it speaks to the merciful nature of Krishna. So much for the demons in the Braj Leela. Much to be learned from them in those Leelas, right? So it's very instructive to us. Does that help? Good.
The next question is from Madunam in Chile.
He says, religion involves participation in a particular belief, a story, rituals, and common activities that connect human beings with divinity. Thus, we understand that there may be people who have a deep spiritual experience and do not necessarily adhere to a specific religion, while there are those who, while practicing a particular religion, leave very little room for spirituality. Religiosity can have potentially negative effects when accompanied by feelings of anger or punishment from God, or condemnation of sexual minorities, or situations of conflict between religious and personal beliefs. It is not easy to know how spiritual aspects influence people's lives, even leading them to suicide, as was the case with Chota Haridas in the past. My question is how to understand the act of suicide due to religious beliefs versus suicide due to spiritual beliefs. Since there have been cases of many young people committing suicide for religious or cult reasons. Thank you, Gurudev.
Well, I think some people have committed suicide for, in religious cults, there's some examples of that. They think that the end of times is coming, and so on and so forth. And that is to be attributed to their doctrine, their indoctrination, the short-sightedness of the leader. These are not. This is not something you're going to find in the major religious traditions of the world that have founders who are like lighthouses on the shore of the ocean in which we're drifting, showing the shores here. Your Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, your Rumi, Jesus of Nazareth, the Buddha, and so forth. These people may be few and far between, but they loom very large in terms of their inner experience that has external observable characteristics which are extraordinary and miraculous, harnessing their humanity entirely, and so forth, and universal compassion, and so on. So these persons have formed, or religious traditions have formed around their teachings that have been around for a long time. Now they can become weakened, they can become distorted. That's true. But usually what you're talking about is very extreme distortions of the traditions, where somebody says, I'm the second coming of the Jesus, here I am, and join me. And some people get taken in by charismatic persons. And then the whole cult suicides or something like that. So this is not something that's, advocated within major religious traditions. What to speak of schools of Vedanta? So that's one thing. then as far as suicide from a spiritual point of view, I mean, there may be some cases. You could look at Jesus. If he had the power not to die on the cross, but he chose to, right? I mean, of course, the story, he's the Son of God, so he could do anything. He could walk on water. He rose from the dead. So if he didn't want to die on the cross, he didn't have to, but he chose to, right? You could call that a suicide in a sense, even though the nailing was, done by somebody else. There are saints in Vrindavan who could be taken to the hospital in old age for some ailment that they could be cured from, but refused to go and willingly accepted death, and with attachment to Vrindavan. This is kind of shades of suicide. They chose to die. They chose to die. So this is very, very different than the other that we discussed earlier, the other side. Then you cite the example of Chota Haridas, who gave up his life out really of love for Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And the thought that he had, I guess you could say the thought that he had displeased him in some way was something he could not live with. You have to look at events like that in terms of the results. And the result was very beautiful and very extraordinary and very miraculous. That's not happening when, some cult leader gives everybody poison and drinks it himself and says the world's coming to an end, and so forth. There's nothing to celebrate about that. But if you look at Chota Haridas and follow the story, it's quite extraordinary. And what did he do? He drowned himself in the Ganges, and then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu appeared before him, and so on and so forth. So you look at the results, and you see there's quite a contrast. And you look at the reason behind it. He had such love for Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. The thought that he could displease him in the slightest way was something he couldn't live with. That's very extraordinary. So they had extraordinary results. So that's how I would think about those two sides of the suicide that you are concerned with. What else?
So the next question is from Radha, Brigupad's daughter.
And so Radha, she's asking, in a purport to the 10th chapter of the Gita, Prabhupada writes that there is only one sun and that the stars reflect the sun's light. This seems to contradict many astronomical observations. Is it true? And if not, why did he write that?
Well, I would say, and I think that Prabhupada would agree, that he was not an astronomer. And it's something, sometimes sadhus, they learn things in different places, and then they're relative, like, in the big picture of life and philosophy, does it really matter if there's one sun that is causing all other non-luminous planets to be illumined, or if there are many suns? I mean, in the big picture, it really doesn't matter. We could talk about matter and the objective world in any number of ways and be convinced about it and find out otherwise. we have come to believe, based on scientific data, that there are many stars, right, that are not illumined by the sun but are self-luminous. But for all we know, that could change too. I mean, things change within the scientific community radically, and the scientific community prides itself as being willing to change, which they're not always really very willing to change when the data contradicts a particular paradigm that's been in place for some time. But what I'm saying is, overall, it's relative. Therefore, there may be different conjectures about the external world and how it works and so forth that have been posited by saintly persons over the ages. And those conjectures may not correspond with actual observable evidence that has been acquired by methods at present that weren't available in times gone by. Therefore, you're going to find some difference between what ancient texts say about the external world in terms of details from what we'll say in the modern world. You have to understand, though, those texts were preoccupied not with the details of the external world, but with the nature of the self. And with regard to the external world, by and large, they posit it's here today and it's gone tomorrow, and that's what's really important. That's what's really significant. And so we're open to, the details of which planet is luminous and which one's not is something that we are open to having a different opinion about than what Prabhupada wrote. But it's likely that Prabhupada learned that at some time when that was taught. And like other things, there are a number of things he says that he was taught in school, and he carried that with him and repeated it. But it's with regard to something that's very relative, and it's not of much consequence. And if we were to say to Prabhupada, actually, the evidence shows that all these are all stars. I mean, you go, okay, all right. It's not like the Bhagavad Gita is based on whether it's a crucial point. But I appreciate your curiosity in the matter and your interest. But I think what's important is that as Prabhupada said, I'm not omniscient. I don't know everything, he said. And he would often relate things that he learned from others about the world, only to find out that it was different. And then if he did, he could change his mind if he gave a good argument. So there's probably seems to be a pretty good argument that there are other luminaries out there besides the sun, right? So those are my thoughts on that. I hope it's helpful. Okay, well, we've run out of time with that, and I got my first question from Radha. I'm very happy about that. After so many years of knowing her, she's starting to notice me over here. I very much appreciate that. You've been part of my life and my thoughts, but glad to know that I'm in yours today. And my condolences to you and your family for the passing of your mother recently, again, which I wrote to Prabhu. So nice to be with all of you, and I expect to be with you again next week. Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai.
Jai.
Gaur Premanande.
Haribo. Srila Guru Maharaj Ki Jai. So thank you, everybody. And I think we got through all the questions today. So please do think lots of nice questions for next week, and let us know, and we can add you to the list.
And we very much hope that our Gokula Chandra's father, our Uncle Janusz, hope you get better quickly. Hope you feel well soon.
Okay. Have a lovely week.